We were wrong. Terribly wrong. Those aren't the words of a protester, not a journalist, not a whistleblower. They came from the man who helped lead one of the deadliest wars in modern American history. Robert McNamara, U.S. Secretary of Defense, the architect of the Vietnam War. But his confession came too late. Long after the bodies were buried, long after the villages were burned, long after trust was broken. And he wasn't the only one. Behind speeches, flags, and policy briefings, history hides a shadow, the regrets of power, the decisions that leaders made and later wished they hadn't. This is not hearsay, not fiction. These are America's most regretted decisions, in their own words. The Vietnam War was meant to stop communism. Instead, it became one of the most devastating blunders in U.S. history. The United States dropped more bombs on Southeast Asia than in all of World War II. Entire forests were flattened, villages destroyed. Agent AP, a chemical defoliant, caused generations of birth defects and cancers in both Vietnamese civilians and American soldiers. More than 2 million Vietnamese civilians were killed. Over 58,000 American soldiers died. And it was all for a war the Pentagon knew couldn't be won. We knew we weren't going to win, but we didn't know how to stop. By 1967, internal memos warned of strategic failure. But instead of withdrawal, America escalated. Thousands more were sent to die for a war that was already lost. We misjudged the enemy. We underestimated nationalism. We lacked humility. And above all, we lacked the courage to say, we were wrong. Terribly wrong. That line would haunt McNamara until his death. It started with a speech at the United Nations, February 5, 2003. Colin Powell holding a vial and warning the world of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. He called Saddam Hussein a threat, said Iraq had mobile chemical labs, that war was necessary. But the intelligence was flawed. The evidence was manipulated. There were no WMDs. What followed was a brutal invasion, a prolonged occupation, torture at Abu Ghraib, and a civilian death toll exceeding 200,000. It's a blot. I'm the one who presented it, and it will always be a part of my record. Colin Powell. Even U.S. generals admitted they were unprepared for the insurgency. The war destabilized the region, and from that chaos, ISIS was born. Between 1953 and 1973, the CIA ran one of the most secretive and unethical operations in modern history, MK-Ultra. The mission? Test drugs and psychological techniques to control minds. LSD was administered to unwitting civilians, including mental patients, prisoners, and even government employees. Some were dosed for days without their consent. Others were subjected to electroshock and isolation. At least 2 deaths were directly linked. Dozens more never knew what had been done to them. We must avoid written records. No paper trails should exist. CIA Memo 1954. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MK-Ultra documents. Roughly 20,000 survived by accident. They revealed a network of over 80 institutions, universities, hospitals, prisons, all complicit. The full truth may never be known. It's one of the darkest chapters in the CIA's history. Senator Frank Church. In the 1980s, the U.S. funded Islamic fighters in Afghanistan to counter the Soviet invasion. It was called Operation Cyclone, and it's still the largest covert operation in CIA history. The U.S. armed and trained Mujahideen fighters, some of whom later became part of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Billions of dollars in weapons flowed through Pakistan into extremist hands. When asked about the long-term consequences, National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski said, "What is more important in world history, the Taliban or the collapse of the Soviet Empire?" There was no regret in that statement. But history would offer its reply on September 11, 2001. In the aftermath of 9/11, the U.S. began mass surveillance, secretly monitoring phone calls, emails, messages. The NSA collected billions of data points, many on American citizens, with no warrants, no oversight. This wasn't intelligence. It was total surveillance. It wasn't until Edward Snowden leaked documents in 2013 that the world saw the full extent of it. We were so successful, we forgot to ask whether we should. General Michael Hayden. The U.S. government justified it as necessary, but federal courts later ruled parts of the program illegal and unconstitutional. Even inside the intelligence community, some officials admitted, we went too far. Regret doesn't undo damage, but it reveals what truth tried to say all along. The decisions were real. So were the deaths. So were the lives. And in the end, so were the confessions. We were wrong, terribly wrong. It's a blot. No paper trail should exist. We forgot to ask whether we should. These are not just regrets. They are the cost of unchecked power, paid by the innocent,